Welcome everyone. Just while Tamara is getting her microphone sorted out, it is a pleasure to welcome you to this STIR session. It's a great opportunity to talk about a very important issue, the many types of gender gaps that we have, and we have an excellent panel today to dig in a little bit deeper into three main areas: the pay gap, the stay gap, and some age gaps too, different perspectives on the gender gaps that we face today. We couldn't do this series without our help from sponsors like ACCA, Broadridge Financial Services, Marsh, the University of Chicago School of Business, EY, and Vodafone Americas. And it's my pleasure today to welcome Jill Whitty-Collins, who's going to be our expert moderator for this session. Jill will let you know who the panel are in a bit more detail in a moment. Jill herself has had many years of experience with leading global brands for Procter & Gamble. And she's written an excellent book, which is about why men win at work. If you get a chance to get that book, do have a good read and enjoy that. I'm going to turn over to you, Jill Whitty-Collins, to get our started with the panel, and thank you very much everyone for joining us.
Thank you so much, Alice, for the introduction, and hello everybody. Fantastic to be here. So just a few words from me before we start. You know, we talk about the gender gap, we talk about the gender issue, and sometimes we talk about it as if it's one gap and it's one issue and it's one thing, and if we could just fix that thing, then we could fix gender inequality and we could have equality. But of course, when you spend even a bit of time thinking about the gender gap and the gender issue, you realize that it's actually driven by lots and lots and lots of gaps and lots and lots and lots of different issues. And that's what makes it so complex. That's what makes it so difficult to solve, even when you're in an environment where people have absolutely fantastic intentions and are doing good work to fix it. So in understanding the complexity of all those gaps is super important. I talk about a lot of the gaps in Why Men Win at Work. I obviously talk about the gender pay gap, which is probably the one we talk about most, and pretty much everywhere you look there's a roughly 17% pay gap between the genders, and every company I work with as a consultant always says to me, we don't have a gender pay gap. We absolutely don't have a gender pay gap. And then we look at their data, and of course they do have a gender pay gap, and then we work on that. The confidence gap, I call it the competence versus confidence equation. That causes a huge amount of the issue. We could talk for hours just about that one. The visibility gap, I call it the umbrella theory. It's the same thing, the gap in often between the genders in making themselves visible. I also am very, very fascinated by the respect gap, which I think drives a huge amount of the issues. And many of you probably know that Marianne Siegart's just written and launched a book called The Authority Gap. So there are gaps absolutely everywhere, but today we're going to really focus in and talk about some of the gaps that we don't necessarily talk about so often yet, and we absolutely should. And I'm really looking forward to exploring these gaps with three experts in gender equality who come from very different fields and very different angles, and have lots of incredible insights about this. So let me introduce my fellow experts. Firstly, give us a wave, each one. We have Megan Dobenek, who is General Counsel and Company Secretary for Vodafone Americas. And amongst many other things, she's also on the advisory board of Women in Comms. So huge welcome to you, Megan. We also have Bill Bradshaw. Give us a wave, Bill. He is Director of Inclusion and Diversity at Witham. and prior to that was Chief of Staff at KPMG, and prior to that began his career at Ernst & Young, so tons of experience in this area as well. And then we also have Claire Mason, wave from Claire, who is founder of the award-winning thought leadership consultancy Man Bites Dog, who have worked with many, many incredible clients over the years, including Korn Ferry, BP, Google, and have won over 80 awards for the work that we do. So we have some fantastic people here to talk about this issue. So let's get stuck into it. I'm actually going to ask the first question to Claire. Because I know that you and I share our huge frustration with what you call the gender say gap. I didn't call it that, but I share your frustration with it. Tell us what is the gender say gap, and why is this such an important issue for you? Why is this the one that you're probably the most passionate about?
Well, thanks, Jill. Well, the gender say gap is a term I coined to highlight the invisibility of women and other diverse groups as authorities in business and in public life. Women are disproportionately the experts in the room. We're more likely to have a degree and to work in a high status profession, but we're simply not seeing women and diverse leaders in positions of power and as subject matter experts. We're still outnumbered 4-to-1 in conferences and up to 5-to-1 in the media. And not hearing from expert women and diverse leaders matters because we're only getting half the story, which means we all face the consequences of these huge gaps in information, representation and policy, which has been really evident throughout the pandemic in the way that the pandemic has impacted women more than it's impacted men, because our voices haven't been listened to. And also, as we seek to attract more diverse talent into areas and sectors where women and people of colour and other diverse groups are underrepresented, we're really missing a trick if we're not shining a spotlight on role models as well. So we really need to demand, say, equality, make sure that our ideas and our voices get heard.
I mean, I'm so with you on this. It's just, you know, I'm just cheering along with everything that you say. And, you know, I remember when I mean, I laughed. I remember there was a review of, you know, what had happened in the UK during the pandemic, and how there was a conclusion that there hadn't been enough women in the room when some key decisions were made about childcare and, you know, whether or not we should close the beauty industry. And the conclusion of this was we should have had some gender experts in the room. And you think, no, you didn't need gender, you just needed some women in the room. I mean, it was kind of hilarious, but you're sort of weeping and laughing at the same time. And, you know, I'm just obsessed with, you know, 50% of the population, 50% of the representation. For me, I mean, it really is that simple.
It's a no-brainer, isn't it? So, for example, we had 6 entire months of COVID briefings between sort of last year and December, entirely fronted by men, not a single woman fronting a single one of them. And so the national media in the UK were outraged because they couldn't meet their own self-imposed gender targets, because on the newsreel it was all men speaking, because that was the news and those are the people presenting the briefings. So they were talking to me about, you know, what do we do when our own government is almost normalising a lack of women's voices and a lack of women in authority. So as you say, the pandemic is a really sad example of what happens when this goes wrong, and we have this widening gender say gap.
It's incredible, isn't it, that we accept it? Actually, it's incredible that we just sort of accept it as normal, that what we mostly see men, we mostly hear men, and women just kind of think, well, that's the way it is. I think when I get the sense definitely in the last year we're all accepting it a little bit less. So for you, what do you think are the key things that we need to do to close this gender say gap? What would you do if you were queen of the world and had the power to close the gender say gap?
I love that idea. So if I was queen of the world for a day, I would love that. That would be great fun. There are many things I would do, and one of them would be to really ask organisations and women to help close the gender say gap. So there's already demand for greater balance in the media by readers, by the media, by conference organisers. So actually the demand for diversity is there. We now need to fix the supply problem. And so we can do that by organisations thinking really hard about who is representing us, because a lot of the time it doesn't even have to be the CEO or the board. It's an expert within your company who's a commentator. Who is that, and why did you select them? And why aren't you providing more women and diverse subject matter experts as spokespeople? So if I was queen for the day, I would ask every organisation on this webinar today to take 3 actions to really bring about say equality. The first is to audit your say equality. So measure your gender say gap, measure your diversity say gap, and set some bold targets for change. Then you need to create a training program that will build confidence and capability in some of these really awkward things like public speaking and conference speaking and so on, so that people really have the capabilities and you have that talent to offer. And then use your influence as speakers and as sponsors to absolutely demand diversity in everything that you're involved with. So there's a huge opportunity for allies there. And then secondly, it's up to us as women ourselves. I want to live in a world, and I'm queen of the world, where, you know, organisers of conferences or the media can't say, we phoned 10 women and they all said no. So we ourselves have that responsibility too, to stand up and have our say. And it is awkward and slightly terrifying. But actually, if we take the emotion out of it and just treat speaking like a skill like any other, we should just go out and get some training, get some practice. I set myself the goal of saying yes to every opportunity for an entire year. And I got myself into all sorts of scrapes. I actually got paid by the Finnish government to perform at a feminist swearing night. So you can imagine the crazy scrapes I got myself into. I've been in stand-up comedy clubs, but I've also been in the House of Parliament. So get some practice. And I think volunteer for opportunities and also ask for opportunities to spread the word, and you'll find that great organisations will give you a platform for change, and recommend other diverse speakers, pay it forward. So I really think that if we can close the gender say gap, we can then use our voices to close some of the other gaps that Jill was talking about, because we can be heard, we can get our perspective across, and therefore use our voices for good. So yeah, I encourage you all, stand up and have your say. And for all of you in organisations, how can you use your influence to close the gender say gap?
I think you're so right, and I think the tip to all of us to say, you know, just do it, just say yes. I know, and you know, another one of the gaps is the say yes gap, right? It's the, you know, the old chestnut that men are much more likely to go for something if they feel 60% confident to do it, whereas many women will wait for 100%. And I think men have got this right, because perfection doesn't exist, and if you wait to be perfect, you just don't do it. So I think that's fantastic advice. Now, Bill, I know that one of the things you're really passionate about is that one of the key drivers of these gaps, of all of the gaps, is the lack of transparency on data, that we don't have transparent, we don't share data transparency. There is really a transparency of data gap, actually, that's often underlying all of these things and could really fix it. Tell us a little bit about what you've learned about this from your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Gil, thank you so much. And Claire, kudos for your comments. Really echo those. So, you know, it's interesting because from a diversity lens and inclusion lens, we often look at, you know, what are our statistics? What does the organization look like that we work at, right? And we quite often will come out with stats like we're 47% women, 53% men, right? But let's dive deeper into those numbers. So where's the leadership numbers? Where's the promotion numbers? Where's the, you know, individuals making it to the highest level of the organization? And when you start to peel back that onion, those numbers are very, very small. But that's not what we put out to, you know, press, to our prospective employees, to, you know, our prospective clients. So it's interesting because in the professional service world, which I've sat in for most of my career, probably 20 plus years, we've often found this is the common theme. And what happens is we benchmark ourselves across what everyone else is doing. And we're like, oh, well, we fall in that, you know, close to 50%, you know, norm. But if you start to peel back that onion, you really realize that the women that are getting to the highest level of the organization is a very small percentage. So the availability to have transparency to your own people first internally, so they can understand what that means, is super important. It's a decision factor. Are you going to stay at this organization? Because is there a spot for you? And I did not coin this phrase, but I've used it a million times. If you cannot be what you cannot see. So to Claire's point, people aren't going to stay if they don't see women in leadership. And we've seen that multiple times. The other piece is just being transparent to folks when they ask that. I mean, I can't tell you from a professional service lens how many times I get questions daily from prospective clients on what does your demographic of the firm look like? You know, what does that look like? And to be honest, I can give them 47 and 53 and they'll be okay with that. But I also want to be candid, and I want to be able to be authentic and say, yes, while it's 47, 53, X amount of partners are female, right? And then we also have to remember, we can't just lump females all together. With transparency also comes, you know, women of color, right? And those breakdowns, and they're so important because we quite often forget. And if you were even to look at the women of color percentage compared to the non-women of color percentage, it's an even smaller number. So, you know, my advice is be transparent, share your numbers, look at your numbers every quarter and see what's happening. Follow the trends, because I will tell you right now, there is a ton of trends. People are leaving certain workforces at a rapid rate at a certain level, and there's a reason. At a certain gender, and there's a reason. At a certain ethnicity, and there's a reason, right? So look for those gaps. You know, look at those exit interviews, look at all that stuff, and be transparent with your data. I think that's the only way we are going to be able to move the needle. And celebrate your successes. I mean, I will tell you, you know, as transparent as we can be, if we don't get out there and say, hey, we have, you know, a female chairman, or we have a female executive committee member who just was promoted. I will tell you at Witham, I am proud to say we have our first female management committee individual that was nominated this year. So we've been around 40 years and we just got our first female. So kudos, right? Like, I was cheering in the background, but did we celebrate that success? Like, did we go out there and say, congratulations, Teresa, you made it on management committee? Not so much, right? And not because it's a bad thing. It's just, do we want to bring attention to the fact that those women are not in those seats? But from my lens, it's like, let's celebrate the success so we can show people that there is an opportunity for them to do that.
Absolutely. And it is, you know, the more we see it, the more normalized it is. You know, we just have to get used to not just seeing leaders that look this way or talk this way, but, you know, seeing leaders who any gender, any accent, any color, you know, it's so important. And I think, you know, your point about the data is a massive one, because it's really about, isn't it, are you really asking the question? Are you really peeling the onion, or are you just ticking the box? You know, it's very easy to tick the box and say, hey, we're 50-50, but do you really want to know? Do you really want to understand the issue? Because if you do, you have to do what you've said, and you have to peel that onion and really look at the data. And, you know, as I was doing the research for the book, I mean, it was absolutely incredible, because I looked everywhere. I looked business, sport, politics, every country, every organization. And it is absolutely everywhere less than 10% women at those senior levels. Even if, you know, Duncan will tell us, even in industries like the magazine industry, where there are a ton of women at the entry level, you look in the boardroom and there are fewer than 10%. So it's, to me, it's, are you gender washing? I like to call it. Are you gender washing, or are you really looking and trying?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I would add, Gil, to Claire's point, when I was at KPMG, we released a study called the 3 R's, risk, resiliency, and reward. So if anybody wants to look at it, it's out there on the web, you can look it up. And it was a really great study about the risks women take and what risks they take compared to men, how resilient are they, and what's the reward, right? Like, so how those 3 things are connected. Yeah. And I remember when we released that study when I was at KPMG, fascinating research, absolutely fascinating. And so many women were, as we would talk about it, they found themselves in those roles. And I said, so what do we do to create a different agenda, change your blueprint, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know you're also very interested in the age gap. I know that when we've talked, the age gap is a big one for you as well. Can you talk a little bit about that for us and how important you think that is?
Yeah, so again, I have my professional service hat on, accounting firm hat on, because I've done that work for so long. And you think quite often, there's an age limitation in most professional services firms. So you age out at a certain point. Like, thank you, have a nice day, here's your pension, you can go on your way. So what happens is, if we have individuals, and I'm going to use general, we have a female who's started her career with a professional service firm, took some time off to raise her family, worked part-time, came back, decided to not come back full-time, maybe waited for those kids to get a little bit older, come back, and it hasn't enough runway to get to partner, because you have to retire at a certain age. She's out of luck. Mm-hmm. So it's really understanding, for me, what I say to those individuals is, what does your career path, like, what do you want? Do you want to make partner? Because if you want to make partner, we have to figure out how to make partner for you. So it's really going back to asking the individual what that means, because you will age out, in any organization, not just professional services, right? But historically, we age out at a certain point. So if you come back into the workforce, and let's just say you're, 55, are you going to make partner in the next year and a half? They're not going to put you up for partner, because you have to retire at 60 or 65. So there's there's not the same opportunity that your colleagues have had that didn't take that step backwards, or family time. So I think it's really about understanding what you desire to do, like what your career aspirations are. I mean, I have many women that I mentor that are career managers, and they're fine with that. That's what they want. We can't always assume that they want to get to the highest level. Ask them. We also have some that are like, look, I'm coming back part-time. My baby's 6 months old. I'm going to work part-time. How am I still on track? Where do I find that? So I think it's understanding what it means, and really understanding how we can get them to that end game, because the age out question is always there. When you come back into the workforce, what is the amount of time that you've left? What have you missed out? And it doesn't always matter, what your skill set looks like. It's, you came in when you were 55. We make you retire at 60 as a partner, or 65, whatever it happens to be.
It's a sad reality for us all. Now, Megan, I know you're really passionate about the age gap as well, and particularly from the point of view, as you know, of an absolute reality that as women get older, as menopause kicks in, this is a very real driver of pushing women out of the workforce. Talk a little bit about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, well, first I would just say that listening to this, sometimes I get so enraged that we're still having these conversations. But then I also remind myself, I'm really lucky that I work for an organization that has really kind of put its money where its mouth is, in terms of, we've publicly stated our ambition to say, that is, we want to be the world's best employer for women by 2025. And so as a part of that, it is, to Bill's point, it's about reporting the data, but it's also, which we do at the board level, senior management, middle management, and then staff, right? All of that's wonderful. But I think the thing that we have done over the last couple of years that has, I think, been most important is really for women looking at what are the points in time where it is most challenging to retain women. Because my personal opinion is, I hate when I read about companies who are like, well, our pipeline is always 50-50. I'm like, I don't care about your pipeline. I don't think your pipeline has to be 50-50 in order to be 50-50 at every level. What you need to do is you need to look at the reasons why women leave the workforce. So we started with kind of your classic maternity policy, we expanded it to family, paternal policy, non-birthing parent to capture, adoption and surrogacy. But most recently, and something that's very, very near and dear to my heart at this point in my life, is we actually just rolled out a global menopause policy, because we did a study, and we estimate 15% of our global workforce is currently impacted by menopause. And so the question is, how do you make it a discussion in the workplace, right? The first thing is, we rolled out a policy to say, this is a real fact in 50% of our employees' lives, right? that this is something that goes out of it. We believe 15% of our workforce goes through it. So you start normalizing the conversation by having conversations and having the policy. But I think more importantly, what we've done also is, in addition to starting the conversation, we've rolled out, we're really clear that we provide support, we provide assistance, training, awareness for women who are negatively impacted by menopause. I mean, for some women, it's not awful, but for some women, it can be really, really deleterious in terms of time away from work, challenges managing your work-life balance, or just how do you conduct yourself as a professional in the workplace. So what we've done is to be really clear about the support and assistance we provide to women who may be impacted by menopause. We're clear that our existing policies cover menopause as a, kind of quote unquote condition, warranting if you need leave, if you need employee assistance program through mental health, or if there's physical health consequences, that is also covered by our policies. And we negotiate with our healthcare insurers to make sure that some of those needs are also covered. So it's real, right? It's not just talking the talk. It's putting that structure around what we have to say, and making it real in people's lives, and finding, I think the final piece, finding women who are very senior in our organization to talk about it and say, this sucks. This is not pleasant. It makes my life really difficult. And, I'm not ashamed of it, right? Like, this is just a fact, just as I had children at some point in time and nobody had a problem talking about that, right? It's something to celebrate. Somehow it's still, menopause is treated as a dirty secret. So I think from the maternity piece all the way through menopause, we now have basically holistic policy and support for women who are employed by Vodafone globally in order to take care of themselves and to retain women at all levels, right? Because it's not just getting them in the door, it is retaining them. And you need to be clear about why do women leave? Like, what are the really consequential life changes that can cause women to leave, and how can we respond to that?
I'm going to get you to talk more about those in a second, but I just want to, on this age gap point and this menopause point, I find it so fascinating, actually, the connection between Claire's say gap and this age gap, because even 10 years ago, nobody talked about menopause, right? You just wouldn't talk about it. You wouldn't hear about it. And I absolutely feel it's much more acceptable to talk about it now, and to actually, it's much less embarrassing to acknowledge that it may potentially biologically be happening to you. And I think that links to the say gap, because we have so many women, not necessarily as represented in the traditional media as we'd like them to be, but in social media, women incredibly well represented and talking a lot about the menopause. And then obviously, women like Davina McCall as well, doing a phenomenal job. So that closing that say gap on, giving women a chance to talk, women start talking about things that didn't used to get talked about, which then become normalized, which then can help us close age gaps and stay gaps. It all links, doesn't it? All links. So I want to come back to the others. These are all stay gaps that you're talking about, and obviously the age gap, the menopause is one of them. I want you to talk a little bit more though about the other stay gaps. So when you, Megan, have done that work that you talk about really understanding what are those key moments in a life, in a career, when you either going to choose to stay or you're going to choose to not stay. Talk a little bit more about those. What are the drivers of them, and what do you think we need to do to address them?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll start with the easiest one, where I think most companies have made, not most, many companies have made quite a bit of progress, is when you have a child, right? I mean, when you have your first kid, or you go from 1 to 2, maybe not so much 2 to 3, but like, it's incredibly challenging to balance, how do I take care of this child that I had because I wanted a child. I don't not want to see my child. And how do you maintain, how do you continue to work, especially when you have, when you're working hard and you're ambitious and you want to continue to progress and you don't want to leave, it's really challenging to juggle that. So, we have implemented a policy that I think, we put it into place originally just for birth mothers back in 2015, which is we give all of our employees globally, I'll actually through the expansion of our policies to basically cover family life additions, let's put it that way, where we give, if all of our employees can request 4 months off at full pay. And then when they come back to work for the next 6 months, they work 30 hours a week and they still get full pay, right? So you're covering just about the first year, which can be so hard and so exhausting, and making it more manageable to be the kind of parent that you want to be for your new child, and to be the kind of professional or employee in the workplace that you want to be, right? It's recognizing that this is a real juggle and you shouldn't necessarily have to choose between the two, because they're both really important parts of your life. And I would say your family is always the most important part of your life. Work will always be there. So it's respecting the fact that basically, we encourage everybody to bring their full self to work, right? And that full self reflects what are the demands on you in your personal life. And so it's trying to make it easier that you can actually be your whole self at work and juggle the demands of your personal life and still be the kind of employee you want to be, and still, succeed and be ambitious and, whatever you want. So that's one part. The second part, and actually this is the thing, I don't know, pretty proud of the menopause part, but I may be more proud of our Reconnect policy, which is we recognize that there are a lot of women, for whatever reason, sometimes they just want to be at home with their kids. Sometimes they just can't do the juggle. And let's be honest, it is expensive to have children, right? And childcare is awfully expensive. And sometimes it makes more sense to take a break from work and to stay home with your kids, or stay home for any reason whatsoever. It doesn't really matter. So we have a program now called Reconnect, which is for women who have been out of the workforce. What the research shows is that one of the two biggest challenges for women who've been out of the workforce for, I'll say material period of time, more than a year, up to 10 years, whatever, is how do they recreate those professional connections? How do they refresh their skills so that they can be attractive in the marketplace? And that is the focus of our Reconnect program, is to look at women who've left Vodafone and to say, how can we bring them back into Vodafone or to another employer, but hopefully Vodafone, and how can we help them create these professional connections, and how can we help them refresh their skills so that they can re-enter the workforce successfully? Because for me, I think that is such a huge gap. And I think about my mother who, stayed home to take care of all of us kids, and her friends, right? And the inability that they had, when they wanted to get back into work that they actually wanted to pursue. So I think that, that's the other policy, that we have to, it's not necessarily stay, it's re-entry, right? And it's to help people, it is a version of stay. It's more about re-entry, but again, it brings them back to Vodafone. And then with menopause, right, the final piece of the puzzle. So those are, for me, those are the key parts.
I think it's brilliant to listen to. And what I love is, this, again, you're not just thinking gender gap, you're not just thinking stay gap, you're really, to Bill's point, you're peeling that onion. You're not just staying at that surface level, really looking at the data, looking at all of the moments, where are the issues, what can we do, and just accepting this isn't simple, it's complex, and therefore the solution needs to be, thorough. It can't just be a superficial one.
Right.
I'm personally, one of the things I'm most passionate about is gender neutral policies, gender neutral parental policies, gender neutral flexible work policies. I think if we truly did that and meant it, not just on paper, but in practice, we really meant it when we said we expect and want you all to take us up on this, that would change a huge amount of this, and it would close some of these stay gaps, I think, almost within minutes. If we knew that a man was just as likely to disappear for parental leave for 6 months as a woman, it would change so much. So brilliant what you're doing. Good for you. Now I'm going to wrap up this little section with a last question to you all. So just, I'm going to ask you one thing from your experience of all of this. What's the one piece of advice you'd give to women who are at some point in their career about how to mind the gender gaps and not fall down them? So if you have to just say just one thing, what thing are you gonna say? And I'm gonna ask Claire.
So I think these gaps exist for a reason, partly because they're a bit scary. There's something about them that is difficult or awkward in some way. So my one thing would be to face and do the thing that really scares you, and tell people that's what you're doing, and you will be amazed. People will magically appear to help you in that mission. So face and do the scary thing.
And you'll find yourself doing stand-up in Finland before you know it, Claire.
Exactly. What can be the problem?
Not terrifying, but brilliant. Thank you. Bill, what's your one piece of advice for minding the gap, not falling down it?
I would say, take ownership of your own career and raise your hand. Take the stretch assignment, say what you want. There's so many times that I've mentored women and men that are like, they didn't know what I wanted. Did you ever open your mouth and say, this is what I want? And don't be afraid to do that. And one of the terms I tell all of my people, turn your passion into action. So don't tell me you're passionate about it, put it into action, keep moving. That's my advice.
Brilliant, fantastic. Megan, what's your one piece of gaps advice?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think in the workplace, we all somehow think of, I need a little help, as I can't do this. And they couldn't be farther apart. And I think we, probably speaking for just about everybody on the call, we've all learned the lesson the hard way, that when we didn't ask for help, and when we did, it worked out just fine. So that's my advice.
Absolutely. And I think the magic about that is it turns out people like to help you. They actually get an enormous amount out of helping you and helping you navigate these gaps. That puts a spring in their step as they go home in the evening. So you're actually helping them as well by asking for help in many ways. Fantastic. Thank you guys so much for your brilliant thoughts on those gaps. And yeah, I'm going to hand back to Tamara, I think now, who's going to manage the Q&A for us.
Thanks, Jill. We'll try this sound again. Hopefully you can all hear me now.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Really brilliant. So we are in the Q&A section, so I'm going to encourage our audience members to please put your questions either in the chat or raise your hand if you'd like to ask it live, or send me a note. And while we're waiting for that, just sort of one reflection and maybe a question from me on what we've covered already, and then maybe I'll also ask some questions that take us into a little bit of a tangential but different area. It really struck me as you were all sort of very smartly articulating what I believe many women, including myself, have experienced at one point or another during their careers. In fact, I distinctly remember while I was pregnant with my first child, now about to turn 10, I received some very clear advice from a seasoned female executive. And she told me, she said, whatever you do, always keep one foot in the door. And, 10 years later, I think we can now talk about that issue in terms of the gender stay gap, as you all have done. And I wonder, Bill, to your point about early mentorship, and Claire, to your point, and Megan, to your point about reskilling, what are we doing? How are, this was sort of an offhand conversation that we just happened to have, but, how are you helping women like me 10 years ago who want to maintain their careers and, and have a family? What's being institutionalized in terms of help for those kinds of people?
I mean, I would say personally, and what I, like again, coaching folks for many years, I've always said, get your personal board of directors, have those people internal in your organization and outside your organization. So when you do something like, I want to take a break and, have a child or whatnot, you have that opportunity. I think one of the things that we've done at Witham is through our Women of Witham, which is our employee resource group, we have that outreach when folks are on assignment, or on leave. We continue to have those conversations at their leisure, right? Like there's an opportunity for them to stay connected with their colleagues at some level. What I found interesting, I would say in the past 10 years, is that I'm seeing women have children at a later age, right? So it's the pendulum is swinging differently. They're already so far into their career. I'll never forget, when I was at Ernst & Young, I had a partner. She was like, I want to say 50 or 52. And she was like, she came and told us she was pregnant, and none of us knew what to do because we had never had a partner that was a female partner that was 52 and was having a baby. Like literally no one knew what to do. And I think back in my head now and I'm like, I know exactly what I would do now, right? But 10 plus years ago, I didn't know that. So I think we've learned a lot throughout that time on how we can keep our female talent connected when they're not actually physically in the office.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, particularly about staying connected to colleagues and to people who are still, still there.
Yeah, one of the things I would add kind of to the thinking about a 52-year-old partner having a baby, which by the way, if that were me, I'd be dead. More power to her. But I think for me, it's particularly given the level of the organization that I'm at this point in time, right? It is super important that I role model all the behaviors and the things that I want my teams to take advantage of. So everybody has on their calendar right now the fact that I'm out Wednesday to Friday of this week taking my first child off to college, right? Like so I'm really clear that, where my priorities are in my personal life are very public to my team, because if they know I'm comfortable saying that this is my priority in the workplace, then they will be as well. And I think there's a huge amount of role modeling that everybody really needs to embrace, so that others, who are more junior to them, or even if they're peers, right, are encouraged to do that. It's about normalizing it and making it okay and saying, this is just what we do. If I had the flu, right, I would say, I'm home, I have the flu. Why am I talking anything differently about my personal life, my caring demands? So that's what I think is really important as well.
And I'd love to add to that as well. I think we have a huge opportunity right now. The pandemic has obviously been very challenging for women, but it's also an enormous opportunity to change how we work. And that's not even just about women, that's about being human beings and how we want to work. Like, work is not a place. Work is not working within particular hours. Work is achieving something in a way that suits you. So we've got a huge opportunity to reinvent work for all humans, and we should really grab it while we can, because we've proved that with this technology, we can work whatever hours that might suit us, we can work wherever suits us, we just need autonomy and trust. And so I think we really need to seize that for everybody, really.
Yeah, and Claire, what I would add to that is I've spent a lot of time with our leaders saying there should be no disparate impact on when you work, because traditional work hours, 9 to 5, well, I mean, that's out the door, right? Like 9 to 9, more like it. But we've had to shift what that looks like because of the pandemic. And at performance evaluation time, don't tell me someone was a 5+ kicking it out of the park for the last 10 years. And all of a sudden they're now working from home and balancing family, caretaker responsibilities, et cetera. And now they're a 3 because they're working later at night or switching gears on how they work. So the disparate impact that happens because of the pandemic, it doesn't change the level of care someone gives to their work, or how they, the level of an interest that they're doing in their work. I think that's really super important. And you just triggered me to say, like, that silver lining in the pandemic is everyone can work whenever they want to work, right? We all have deadlines. That's great. But it just reminded me of a conversation I had at evaluation time last year with all of our leaders to say, let's think before you check that box on how you're evaluating someone based upon the fact that they had to, pivot how they worked. They're still producing.
And there is that perception that if you work slightly flexibly, you should be at a more junior level. I really don't understand that, why women can't do something at a senior level just because they want a bit more flexibility. It seems crazy. So I think we need to stop normalizing that idea. It's about the job, and perhaps things like public speaking and being a spokesperson is a good opportunity for women to differentiate themselves and show their special skills and get spotlighted so they're actually seen and their value and their unique value is seen as well. So I think it's a bit like what you were saying before, Bill, about, taking control of your career and what makes you stand out and where you can show you're adding value.
That's super helpful. Oh, sorry, Meg.
And I would just say, as a people manager, organizationally, every ounce of flexibility that we have given people this year has been repaid tenfold. So organizationally, it is so ineffective and inefficient to have that, I think, strict kind of demand, because especially this past year, all of our, it makes no sense, right? It is poor. I think it's poor corporate decision making not to give people flexibility, because let me tell you, you are rewarded as an employer for giving people flexibility.
I so agree with you, Megan, and I think it really makes me think about that. I think the most brilliant business book, Jim Collins' Good to Great, the Level 5 Leadership. It's about you get the right people who have personal responsibility, and you let them do their job. Good people will do their job anywhere, anytime. They will get it done. They will get it done whether they're in the office, they'll get it done whether they're at home trying to manage it around their kids. And if you are worried about whether or not you can trust your people to do your job, then you have the wrong people, or you're the wrong leader. Good people will work anywhere. And if you force them to work in the wrong way, you're just going to lose them.
Jill, picking up a bit on the mentorship aspect of this conversation, recently there was a recent article and you spoke about this mini-me syndrome, where men support younger versions of themselves, but women perhaps don't always do the same. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, no, I mean, that there is definitely mini-me syndrome. And obviously, it's a generalization. Not all men do it, not all women don't do it. But yeah, there is a definite phenomenon of it. It's very human, isn't it? If you recognize somebody as, not just, hey, they look like me, sometimes they do, but you know what, they went to my university or my college, they have my accent, they like my football team. It's very, very human to feel extremely comfortable with that person. You don't realize you're doing it, but you're really comfortable with that person because it's you. It's just, it's like being with yourself. And so it's very easy to just unconsciously draw conclusions that person's fantastic and not notice the fantasticness of another person over there who looks nothing like you and comes from somewhere completely different. So we absolutely see that. And obviously, if men have a tendency to do that, if we have men in 90% of leadership positions supporting their mini-me's, and if women aren't doing the same, that's the problem. And we do see, now don't get me wrong, I think every woman on this call has had women who've really looked after them, been a fantastic sister, supported them, helped them. But I'm gonna place the bet that every woman on this call has also experienced the senior woman who has made it and who is absolutely not holding the ladder down for other women, or she's shaking it so violently that other women don't have a chance of holding on. And I've got a chapter in my book called Sisters Are Not Doing It for Themselves, and every woman I know knows exactly what that chapter's about before you go in. And I think there are lots of reasons why it happens, and actually some of them are quite sad, and they're often about the confidence of that woman and her sense of vulnerability, that the scarcity mindset of she's used to being the only woman, so she can't make room for other women. Many sad reasons. But the reality is, I say I have a ton of to-do lists for everyone on the gender gaps, and I have a lot of work that I ask men to do. But I think this one is really on women. I think, men can't do this, but I think as women, we have to say, we got to stop this nonsense of, you know, if you make it, women, I think, have got to learn from men and make room for other women, just the way that men make room for other younger men. I think it's a ridiculous barrier, and one that only women can solve. And I do think, you know, you mentioned mentoring, and obviously mentoring's super important, and mentoring makes a massive difference. If you have a female mentor, or a male mentor can be super helpful as well, if you're a woman, because you do get insights that you wouldn't have seen. But, you know, one of the biggest things I'd say is, don't just stop at mentoring, really becoming a sponsor. And I love that, you know, Anne Franker of CMI has a brilliant quote, which is, mentors talk with you, sponsors talk about you. And I think it just sums it up brilliantly. You know, you need sponsors who, when you're not in the room and there's a fantastic job opportunity or project opportunity, you need people who didn't just have a coffee with you this morning, they're going to throw your name in and say, she would be fantastic for this, we should talk to her. So I would say to everyone, don't just be a mentor, be a sponsor.
Absolutely, I agree. I would second that too, and add that it's funny, Jill, because when you said that, I went right to a conversation I had when I started at the firm, and I did, you know, my leadership roundtable and my kind of tour. And I said, tell me about you know, the leadership at the top and from some of the really successful female leaders here. And they're like, the men said to me, they don't help each other. And that was their perception, right? Like every single leader said the same thing to me. They've gotten here, but they're not always helping each other get here. So what can we do? And my first thought was, you know, where's the sponsorship? Where's the mentorship? Because I believe in, it's not about what you do, it's the legacy you leave. So it's not what you do while you're here at the organization, and that's great, but what are you building that legacy behind you for those individuals you're bringing up with you? I think we have to constantly remind ourselves about that as men and women, that really is who we are. Our legacy is who we are.
I'm so uncomfortable with this narrative. It's really funny, and I hate to disagree with Jill on anything, so I think she's brilliant, but I'm going to be uncomfortable and slightly disagree, and just or just a slight nuance that for me, I hope that these women who don't put the ladder down are a dying breed, and I think it is a small percentage, and I think hopefully drowned out by the huge number of women who really do help each other, and the number of men that help as well. And I think the role of those male allies is really, really key. I've got some great mentors, and things like a big corporation to a small business, like I'm an entrepreneur, is also a really interesting connection to have. So everyone needs a diversity of sponsors and mentors, don't they? And I do think perhaps we under-celebrate how much women do support each other, but I do admit, Jill, yes, I've probably got a couple of experiences and scars as well, but I'd rather forget about that and focus on the real positive.
I don't disagreeing. I've had so many women who've been amazing, but I do think these women are there, and I fully agree with you. The sooner they retire and get out and make way for the new generation who are going to support each other. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, you know, support each other more than men. I'm just saying let's not you know, shoot ourselves in the foot on top of everything else by not supporting each other. But yeah, I agree with you. Some amazing women out there who we need more of those up top.
And I think it used to be you had to, like, I think women who help other women are like, think about it in terms of, I was able to succeed being a professional woman. And the ladder shakers said, I was able to be successful because I acted like a man, right? And I think there is a generational shift, and there's a change in thinking about, you can be successful and be yourself and be, yep, I'm a woman. And some people, for whatever reason, find it really challenging to hear, like, you know, I'm a woman first and foremost. Everything else comes after it, right? Like that is what I am, and I'm going to be successful in the way that I am. And I think most women, or a lot of women nowadays, are like, why do I want to behave any differently than what I am? It's a waste of time and energy. And I think that's the shift, right? Like, and that's what we need to continue to encourage. But I agree with you, Jill. I think there's some people who need to retire. So, you know, different ways of thinking and behaving.
You need to retire. Let's get the dinosaurs out and move on to the future.
Megan, I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of that shift. I'm sort of the tail end of the millennials, right? And so I feel that, push and pull between, should I act like a man? Should I act like myself? Where it's really, really interesting point, perhaps something we can pick up on another session. I'm sorry we didn't get to any audience questions, but I know that I think I can safely say that our speakers would be happy to follow up with any questions that you may have had. Before I thank our speakers, I would also like to mention a follow-up session, a part 2 to today, which will be in partnership with Chicago Booth School of Business. It will be Negotiating for What Matters, a negotiation workshop targeted to women. And that will be on September 28th. So please look out for that invitation. I think it will be a great part 2 to this session. Jill, huge thanks for joining us today and moderating the first half of our conversation. Megan, Bill, Claire, really fantastic to have you. I hope we can welcome you back another time. Thanks to our audience as well. Please, if you'd like to get in touch, if you'd like to follow up, you know how to find us. And hopefully we will see you on September 28th at our part 2 workshop. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.